Hi everyone, this video is a quick video about sensory pathways. So this is kind of an overview of sensory pathways in the central nervous system. So when we think of sensation, right, before we go through the pathway and the terminology, let's talk about what sensory pathways carry. So sensory pathways carry specific sensations, such as we have these general sensations, which are touch, temperature, pressure, pain. So a general sensation, you can think of the receptors are located all throughout the body. You can have pain like internally, like a stomach ache. You can have pain on your fingertips if you burn your hand on the stove. If you step on something sharp, you have pain there. So pain receptors are spread all throughout the body versus we also talk about special senses. Special senses are, there's only 5 of them, and the receptors are located only above the neck. So really specified in the head area. So the special senses, the 5 special senses are vision, right? You know that vision is a sense. It's a special sense because the receptors are only located in the eyes. So we have vision, we have the sense of smell or olfaction, we have hearing, we have taste, and we have equilibrium. Everybody usually kind of forgets about equilibrium. Equilibrium is in your inner ear. It's kind of that feeling, that sensation. If you ride an elevator that's moving too fast and you get a little bit of that like sort of dizzy, strange feeling, that's from our inner ear or equilibrium. Okay, so sensory information in this chapter, we're specifically talking about general senses like touch, temperature, pressure, pain. And sensory information, you have to remember the direction of sensory information goes into your spinal cord and then up to your brain. So the direction of sensory information travels in to the spinal cord and then up to the brain. So here we have a picture. This is an old picture that I'm using. It's not from the textbook that you are currently using. I like this picture because the different neurons are different colors. So I'm just going to use this. You have a very similar picture in your textbook. So here we have a sensory pathway. The first neuron that delivers information to the central nervous system is called the first order neuron. So let me annotate this. I'll circle it in red. Right here is our first, I'm just going to write first, but it's called the first order neuron. If you're labeling this, I want you to label it and fully write out first order neuron. So the first order neuron is the neuron that is bringing information up through that dorsal root and into the spinal cord. That's the first order neuron. Then the first order neuron synapses. Remember, a synapse is the point of communication between a neuron and another neuron, or a neuron and a muscle cell, or a neuron and a gland cell. In this case, the synapse is between neuron and neuron. So the first order neuron synapses on the second order neuron. The second order neuron is this white one. I'm going to trace it here. So the second order neuron is this white one that crosses over. So you see that it literally crosses from what you're looking at, the left side to the right side of the screen. So it crosses over. That scientific term for that is called decussation. So we have crossing over and then it ascends, or it goes up, right? So it's traveling up. Now it's traveling through the medulla oblongata, through the midbrain, and it's going to end right here at the thalamus. So this cross section of the brain you see here, this blue area is the thalamus. So let's go back. First order neuron, red. Synapses on second order neuron, white. The second order neuron crosses over and ascends. The second order neuron synapses on the third order neuron. Let me just change the coloring here. So the second order neuron synapses on the third order neuron. So here's our third order neuron. The area of the synapse between second and third order neuron is this blue area, which I just said is called the thalamus. We say that the thalamus is the relay center of the brain, the relay sensory center of the brain. And so this is the location of the synapse between second and third order neuron. Now, I always think the thalamus kind of then shifts or directs the third order neuron to this specific area of the brain. It's this dark brown area, right? So the third order neuron is projecting to this specific area of the brain called the primary sensory cortex. Sorry, everyone, I'm writing this with my mouse. I don't have a touch screen here in my office. So the primary sensory cortex, if information makes it to the primary sensory cortex, we are aware of that information. So if this pathway, let's say this pathway is carrying the sensation of touch. If the information goes from first order to second order to third order, and then the third order neuron synapses on the primary sensory cortex, and the pathway is carrying the sensation of touch, then we feel touch. If the pathway was carrying the sensation of pain, we would then, if it goes all the way up to this primary sensory cortex, we would feel pain. Now, here's a very cool part. I think it's very cool. I'm just going to outline it in yellow. Do you see all of these body parts here? These body parts are representing the body parts that are represented on the primary sensory cortex. So everybody has their primary sensory cortex mapped out. You see that the hand, this is a hand and fingers, that takes up quite a large area of the primary sensory cortex. That's because we have so many receptors, sensory receptors in our hand and fingertips. We have a lot of them there, so it takes up more room in the primary sensory cortex. Same thing with the face, specifically the lips. We have a lot of sensory receptors associated with our lips. That's why the lips are drawn large here. Here we have like the leg area, the shin, not too many sensory receptors here. That's why it's tiny, because there's not much sort of real estate in the primary sensory cortex. So wherever we have more receptors for sensation, there's a larger area represented in the primary sensory cortex. All right, so let's go back, and I'm actually just going to clear everything, and we're going to do it again. So sensory information, we know sensory information goes in and up. Where we start is the first order neuron. So here is the first order neuron. That's the red neuron, first order neuron. I'm just going to write first. The first order neuron is the one that delivers the sensory information into the central nervous system. Here it's delivering the sensory information into the spinal cord. We know that sensory information travels through the dorsal root of the spinal cord. The first order neuron then synapses on the second order neuron. The second order neuron here is white, so I can't really write second order on a white background, but you get it. The second order neuron crosses over, called decussation, and ascends. So it crosses over and ascends. This is the do you see it? No, you can't see it. So this is the second order neuron. Next, we have the second order neuron synapses on the third order neuron. The third order neuron is this black neuron here. This is the third order neuron. The third order neuron projects then to the primary sensory cortex. Primary sensory cortex. The location of the synapse, where the communication is happening, the location of the synapse between the second and third order neuron, that location is the thalamus. So you have to remember that the location of the synapse, between the second and third order neuron is the thalamus. Third order neuron, remember the thalamus kind of directs that third order neuron where to synapse or end up at the primary sensory cortex. And you see that the primary sensory cortex is mapped. So let's say this pathway carries the sensation of touch. So what do you feel? Well, if the pathway carries touch, then that's the sensation you're going to feel. You're going to feel touch. Are we aware of this information? Yes, we're aware of the information because the third order neuron projects to the primary sensory cortex. So what do we feel? We feel touch. Are we aware of that feeling? Yes, we're aware of that feeling. Where do we feel the touch? Well, since the third order neuron is projecting to this area of the primary sensory cortex, this area of the primary sensory cortex indicates that we're feeling the touch on our hand. Let's say the third order neuron projected to this area of the primary sensory cortex. So it synapses on this area of the primary sensory cortex. We just look over here, and that area is sort of the facial area. So if the pathway is carrying touch and the third order neuron projects to this area, we would feel touch on our face. When it projects to this area, we feel touch on our hand. So that, in a nutshell, is sort of the overall idea of a sensory pathway. There are different sensory pathways that carry different sensations, and you will be asked to learn some of those pathways. But this video is just a generalized idea of a sensory pathway. Now, let me just show you this one last thing. If we were to look at a pathway here, let's just do this again without me annotating. So when the information is delivered into the central nervous system, we always start with the first order neuron. First order neuron synapses on second order neuron. Second order neuron crosses over and ascends. Second order neuron synapses on third order neuron, where that synapse occurs in the thalamus. The third order neuron then projects to the primary sensory cortex. The primary sensory cortex is mapped, so we feel the sensation on a specific body part. If the third order neuron synapses on this area of the cortex, we are feeling whatever sensation the pathway carries. We are feeling that on our hand and our fingers. Now, take a look at this pathway. So here's a pathway where, again, we're going to always start with the first order neuron because that brings the information in. So the first order neuron delivers the information into the central nervous system. In this case, again, it's the spinal cord. First order neuron synapses on second order neuron. Now in this pathway, the second order neuron crosses over and ascends, goes up, and then it goes and synapses in the cerebellum. And that's it. This pathway, this is an example of a pathway that doesn't use all three neurons. It doesn't go first order, second order, third order. It goes first order to second order ends at the cerebellum. So my question, if I were to give you a question like this on your exam, I may say, just by looking at this pathway, is this person aware of the sensation? Can they perceive the sensation? Well, the first thing you would do is say, is the primary sensory cortex involved? This dark brown area of the cerebrum. Is the primary sensory cortex involved? Well, no, there's no action here, right? There's no arrow, there's no neuron projecting to the primary sensory cortex. So if I said, is this person aware of the sensation? You would just simply say no. They are not aware. The thalamus is not involved. There's no third order neuron, and the third order neuron is not projecting to the primary sensory cortex. So can we have sensory pathways that we are not aware of? Yes, we can. And that's good. Let some things go just to our brainstem, just go to our cerebellum. We don't need to be aware of everything. So this is an example of a pathway where we are not aware of the information. All right, hopefully that helps. There's going to be another video that deals with motor pathways. So remember, if sensory pathways go in and up, you can assume that motor pathways go in the opposite direction, so down and out.